we can do step by step to be able to have this animated stretched type. Let me show you maybe what we're talking about as well, the effect that we're looking for. And I believe I had a couple from previous class. Let me find those. And I have a couple of videos that I can share with you as well. So let me go ahead and share my screen. I'll just go to Google real quick. So you guys remember me sharing this effect with you last time? Yeah, so it's just sort of like being able to stretch the points of the type to be able to get it to move in an interesting way. I think it's a really nice way to sort of make things move. Here's another good example of this that's in motion. Love the texture on this. This is by Motion Mob. And I think, you know, the message is wonderful. These are perfect examples of things you could do with your animated poster series that we're doing for our final. So like come up with a cool message that you believe in and, you know, animate it in a cool way. Here's another sort of take on a similar effect, the stretching type effect. So this is sort of one of our 3 ways that I would suggest being able to move type around your screen to be able to animate the type. Here's another version of that. There are ways to do this very fine-tunedly. I'm going to show you kind of a rough way to do this today, but like, for instance, if this was a font that was in a thin sort of standard representation and then a thicker version of itself, you could map it to both of these settings. So if you sort of have one that's very thin and one that's very thick, you can copy paste those keyframes, those path frames. This is going to be a path animation process to be able to go from one to the other. So it's very something you can set up for yourself in this. So this maybe have been 2 versions of the same layout, one where it's thin and scaled up and one where it's thicker and scaled down, to be able to then set up those 2 transition points, which is pretty cool. Here's kind of a little bit more of an illustrated version of this, but I love this effect. I think it's a very fun effect. And it may be a little bit of like a trendy effect too, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It just means it's a way that people like seeing communication nowadays, which is cool. All right, feel free to shout out at me. I'm not going to pull up my screen to see your emojis at the moment since I'm recording, but if you would like to have any questions about that, you're welcome to. I'm going to go ahead and jump into After Effects. So 1080 by 1350, 24 frame rate, and we'll do about 6 seconds. And I do always add 1 extra frame on this so I can align things to that 6-second mark. So my last second is going, or my last frame will be the 25th frame, which is fine. Doesn't make any difference. Okay. We do want to start with a type layer. So I'm going to go ahead and start by clicking a type layer. I'm just going to click somewhere to be able to add type. And let's type in something. See if I can increase this quality. I have a quality issue today. Let's increase my type size. And let me get it on my screen so that we can see it. Let's shrink this down a little bit. All right, I'm just going to kind of center this in my screen. So I've got my character panel open. I've got my paragraph panel open. And one of the other panels that I use periodically is the align, to sort of align it to my composition in the center. That will put your anchor point in the center. So this font is sort of sitting on that center point, or those lettering. If you can't see all your windows, you can go to the window menu. Let me share my screen a little bit differently so you can see the whole thing. If you go to the window menu and you choose workspace, you can always change these. If you're not seeing your panels set up the way that you want, or not seeing the windows that you're looking for, you can actually look for them here. So character and align, paragraph settings, those are all things that you might want to use for this particular exercise in type when we're getting it ready. Right now I've got this set to Avenir. Let's see if I can use, let's see, Acumen on here. Oh, Avenir is fine. Let's do a little bit more condensed font version. So let me go in here. I can actually double click on the text in the layer name to be able to select it. So just working with type layers, if you need to get back in to change the lettering, of course, you can use your type tool to click in there. But if you also double click in there to be able to select the whole thing, and now I can change this. I do want something that's a little bit heavier. Metallic would be fun, but let's just do a standard one. So find a font that works for you that's a little bit thicker. This will make it a little bit easier to work with. If you don't have anything, I think everybody has Impact, might be a good one that's kind of loud and bold. So that one would be a decent one to use. If you don't have Avenir, one of these other ones, Helvetica is perfectly fine. Arial Black works great. Very bold, thick font, which is good. So find a font that works for you. And then let's get started onto this. Condensed. Do. Okay. All right. So we do need this to be set up into a path so that we can animate the paths. So of course you can animate things with our text animator. So right here where it says text, and I can click on the animate feature to be able to animate tracking and all kinds of things. This is great, but we actually want to animate it a little bit differently. So what I'm going to do is right click on this, go to the create space, and then choose create shapes from text. And this is going to make a layer with all of my shapes from this lettering. So again, once you have your word, you do need to double check that it's spelled correctly, because once you change this into outlines, essentially it's sort of like changing something to outlines from Illustrator, that this is going to become not text anymore. It's going to become a shape. So we're going to go right click on the layer, choose create, and create shapes from text. Once I've done that, you should get a completely different layer here that's got the eye turned on. It will turn off the eye on your type layer, so the type layer is invisible now, and we have this all in our tiny little point system. Now I'm going to drill down, open this, and open up my contents. And what you should see is that each of the letters are named now on their own layer, sort of their own. It's not their own layer because it's just in one shape layer, but sort of their own space under contents. So there's in each their own contents layer. So again, I've just drilled down in two spaces. Once you've hit that right click and chose create shapes from text, and then drill down so you can see the contents. Now this first step is to be able to set ourselves up to be able to animate this. So I'm actually going to make my screen very small so I can't see the word. And so I'm just really focusing on my layers. And actually I can hover over my layers panel and hit the tilde button, which is right above the tab button and right next to the left of the number 1 to be able to open these up. And I'm just going to drill these down a couple times until I find the path. And if you can tell, when you drill this down, you can open this up, you can see it's got a fill, it's got some transform features that you can actually animate on each individual letter. It's got a stroke feature if you wanted to use outlines. Right now that's turned off. And then if I drill down again to where it says the letter S in the word something, I have my path. And I actually just want to hit the stopwatch. I'm at 0, 0, but I want to start saying these are features that I want to animate. So as a step in the process, you go through and kind of make sure that all the things that you want to animate are turned on, and then you can reduce the amount of space that you need in your layers panel so that you can work a little bit more efficiently. So I'm going to go through and turn these all on, stopwatches for the path in each one of these contents layers. Now here on the O, if you have a letter that has a counter space, and what we mean by a counter space is the space on the inside of the letter. So it's a path, one path for the inside of the letter and one path for the outside of the letter. And so both of those are two different things that you'll want to animate. I believe the O in my word of something is the only thing that has a counter space in it, but we do want to animate that feature as well, which means when I'm looking at my layers panel again, I'm hitting tilde, so I'm just focusing on that. When I click the stopwatch on the outside of the O, I will also need to drill down and open another shape layer or contents layer that's actually underneath the O section, and to turn that one on as well. So there's actually two keyframes that I'll work with to animate the outside of the O and the inside of the O. And you should see that there's also on any letters that have that feature where it has a counter space, that the merge paths has been included in this section. So it's actually doing quite a lot of work of just kind of putting it into setting it up so that After Effects understands how the shape should behave. All right, I've got both of those open. I'm going to hit the M, drill down with the M and hit the stopwatch. I'll do the E, turn the stopwatch on, and the T, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know why I chose such a long word. You can certainly choose a shorter word if you like. And now I've gone through and turned on the stopwatch for each of my paths on all of these letters. Now, obviously, this is a lot of layers to be able to have open, and it would be very tedious to have to scroll up and down to be able to animate these things. You can hit the U key once, while you have that layer selected to be able to have all of these paths then turned on. So then I'm just seeing only the things that I want to animate and nothing else. I do find that it is kind of helpful. It would be nice if we could rename these properties, which I'm not sure that we can, which is kind of frustrating. But the advantage here is that you can just see a few of your layers when I hit my tilde button again to pull up the rest of my screen and scale this down. What you can do is each one of these that you click on, it should highlight which of them you're actually selecting. And a lot of our process that we're going to do is using the shapes themselves to animate with, rather than having to kind of, identify in the layers panel which is which, if that makes sense. So I want to do two animation types. I want to animate this word in and animate it out in two different ways. Just some fun things that we might be able to do to sort of get them to kind of like stretch in different directions. So some fun stuff there. It does include an S in this word. And as you can tell, there are many more points for the more complicated curves than the ones that are more right angles. So that will be a little bit more complicated process. But I have turned on all of my keyframes for this. So I'm actually going to scroll and kind of select them all and then just move this to the center of my composition. So about 3 seconds. This is where I would like the word to be revealed. I can always mess with the timing again. So it's okay if this seems like 3 seconds seems like a lot of time to be able to animate something. Don't worry about it. We can always change this and make it snappier later on if we want to. And I'll share some videos as well besides the video that I'll upload to YouTube later, this video. We'll share some YouTube links of some people that explain this process very, very well. One of them is like 35 minutes and one's like 5 minutes. So you can choose what you like. Okay, so now I'm also going to select all of these again. So I can click on the top word of the path and hold Shift and select these. Or I figured out a fast way to do this is you can actually just drag select over the keyframes and that'll select all of those layers. I'm going to go back to my 0, 0. So I've moved my first set of keyframes where all the letters read as they should from the word something. I'm going to go move those over to 3 seconds and then go back to 0 seconds and hit my keyframes again to say this is where I want them to start. So I'm going to start moving them off of the screen to sort of say this is where I would like them to go to sort of start from. So a couple different ways that we can do this. And if you guys want to just watch me first, because it's a little bit of sometimes of a hairy process to be able to get the points to select correctly. But if you can tell, once you're in the path, when you have this section selected, these paths, and again, I'm just drag selecting over the keyframes to select them all, you can then see that your cursor, your crosshair, if you have your selection tool, your regular selection tool is now a white arrow tool, which is exactly what we want to be able to move these points around. So what I'm going to do is try and drag select over one set of words. Whoops, there, do you see something that does happen here? If you get off of your points so that you can't see the points, if I click outside of the letters themselves, that selects the top level layer, and then I can't select the points. It's actually selecting the whole layer. So one thing you do need to be careful about in this process is to make sure that you're selecting the points, the paths. And if it's not selecting those, it won't behave in the same way. This is a path animation process, but one that has cool results, I think. So I'm just going to split these up. What I've done is essentially selected all the keyframes, step 1. Step 2, go to my space in my viewport, and then go ahead and drag select over some of the letters that I would like to select, and I can select them all at once. You can also hold Shift while you're drag selecting. So let me do that again. Drag select over all my keyframes. I'm going to then go up to my viewport space, drag select over to select my letters that I'd like to move, then click and drag on one of those points to start moving. Any of those points that are selected to be able to move the whole group. If I then also hold Shift, it will constrain it so that it moves in a straight line. And I'm just going to move those off to the side of the screen. I'll then drag select the other set and we'll move it off to the side of the other side of the screen. So that I want these to both kind of come in from both sides, and I want them to stretch very coolly when they move in. Now, right now, there's no like stretching happening. So we're going to have to add the stretch in between these two. But we should have basic movement of our paths from sort of point A to point B, where we want it to start from and where we want it to go to. Now, what we want to do is have these happen a little bit faster. So there's two ways that we can start these. If we want to go from the back or from the front. And I think maybe we'll start from the front with this. So I'm going to advance maybe about 12 frames, which is about half of my distance. And what I'm going to do is try to make this, whoops, animate a little bit faster. I hit the A key, I need to hit U to open that back up. So I'm going to go ahead and select all my keyframes again. I would like them to sort of start stretching a little bit here. You know what? This is actually easier for me to think about if we go from the back. So I'm going to go 3 seconds and then 2:12, and then select all my keyframes so that I can add a keyframe for all of them all at once. So I actually want these to sort of like stretch from their center points. So we'll work from backwards from 3 seconds to 12, 2:12. So that's halfway. And now what I'm going to do is once I've selected these, I can actually stretch these to their other section. So again, what I'm going to do, drag select all my keyframes so I can see all the points, then go to my viewport so that I have that white arrow tool selected, and then just drag select over some of the points that I want to move. And I can move them. I can hold shift to make sure that they're perfectly straight. If you want to then drag select over other points, you can do that. And then click and drag, and you can hold shift to move them around. And what I want to do is just kind of give these a very stretched feeling from left to right, and as much of a sort of sense as I can to sort of stretch these in a direction. Cool. So I think if we want to add a little bit more extreme stretching on the outside edges, let's do that. So let's hit U, select all my frames, drag select with my selection tool over the frames I want to move. We'll add a little bit more stretching to these pieces that are going this direction here. If you need to select individual points, you can click on them and then hold shift to select others. Oops, got off my frames again. Need to drag select the frames, then drag select over top of these to be able to get them to stretch a little bit more. Let's make the end really dramatic. Well, let's do the end next. So I've done one side. Let's do the other side. So come over here and select the S. This is the one I want to stretch the most as it's moving over. And it's kind of hard to find exactly where the center of the S should be. That's a tough one. We got pretty close there. A lot of times if you zoom really close, it's going to be, you know, excluding some of these points that are in the center sort of counter spaces of those S's. So I'm just going to sort of drag select over about where you think the center is. And that should get you something that's pretty close. So I'll try to stretch that one out the most. Then I'll sort of cascade my stretch. Whoops, going towards center here. I can't see you guys because I'm not looking, but how are we doing? Do you guys just want to say, are we doing okay? Are there questions? Whatever, let's record again. Okay, so one thing that might help with this process to be able to make it kind of look like it's snapping into place and kind of stretching long form wise to be able to get these to sort of stretch into place is if we knew what level of stretching we wanted to have for different quadrants in our composition. So just a suggestion, you don't have to work this way if you feel like you're kind of getting the effect that you're after while you're just doing this kind of piecemeal a little bit at a time. But if you go to your, I believe, view menu, and let me just change my screen share option so we can see the whole desktop here. If we go to the view menu and then choose show rulers or Command R, this is the same hotkey in Illustrator and I think Photoshop also. If you hit the show rulers option, you can actually set up some ruler guides for yourself. So if I know that this is about here, And to the left of this space is about where I want these letters to be like really stretching. This can be sort of a guide for myself to say, hey, this is where I want it to like super stretch. And on this side, I want it to be super stretchy. If I want it to start stretching when it gets past this threshold, then that can be an indicator for me to sort of say, hey, this is where I want it to start stretching. So you can set up guides and conventions for yourself in this way so that there's a consistent amount of like as it goes in and out. And sorry, the only way I know to describe that is with sound effects. But this is a good way to sort of think about working in this way. You can also set up guides for yourself so that you're keeping things perfectly straight and aligned. So if you want to set up a baseline and an X height or cap height, in this case with all caps, you can sort of zoom in and make sure that that is lined up at the bottom of your letter form so that if anything gets off or kind of starts to angle up in a different direction, that it doesn't look too funky. So you can, I think you can turn those on and off with the Command and colon button, which is right next to the letter L, between L and apostrophe. And then Command and R to turn on rulers. And then you just click and drag on the top and bottom ruler to be able to draw out either a horizontal or vertical line. These are not part of your composition, by the way, so they will not be included. All right, I'm going to get back into this. So I'm going to drag select these. I'm actually going to turn off my guides because I don't like having extra lines on my screen. I'm going to move over another 12. And then I'm going to go ahead and start re-stretching these back towards their center pieces. So where do I want them to sort of stretch to? Oops. I'm going to go ahead and drag select my keyframes. I'll hit my keyframe button to give them a keyframe point. And then I'm going to start stretching these going backwards. So this one is about the stretch that I want it to have towards the center here. There's kind of some funky things happening there, but that's all right. It's kind of fun. I got one side, I need to do the other side. Push the T in. Make some space for the O. Sometimes my shift key gets stuck. Oops. It's a little funky, but that's okay. I'll go back 12 frames again. Select all my frames from the next previous section. Go ahead and hit my new keyframe. And then stretch the things that are still on the screen. Just takes a little fine tuning to get this to kind of look like it's stretching evenly. And I don't know that even mine is going to be very even, but it's all good. This T got a little squished at some point. I can always correct things later. Yep. Go ahead and go to my next section here. And if you're not watching my screen, that's perfectly fine. If you feel like you're kind of getting the idea, that is good. One more section to go through. We'll take a look how this looks and then correct it a little bit. I believe I probably have a few of my in-betweens off a little bit, but that's okay. Right. Kind of like the letters are pushing each other. All right, I'm gonna pause recording there just for a minute. Okay, so when we're working on this, guys, again, I think something that we want to work on is just making this like line up a little bit better. So mine looks okay. It kind of has this little bit of a wonky push and pull thing. I don't think I quite got like the spacing right on some of these things, and it's definitely way too slow. I think also my T got a little crazy. I'm not sure what's happening with that guy. So what I'm going to do is actually drag select all of my keyframes. I'm just going to sort of select them all at the same time. So I can drag select just in this empty gray space to be able to drag select those. If I hold down the Option key, I can click and drag on these keyframes while I'm holding the Option key, which articulates them is what I would say it does. It sort of like drags them and evens the space between them all. So if I want to drag this and make it 1 second animation instead of a 3 second animation, I imagine that's probably going to give me a lot more of a kind of the feeling that I'm hoping to get from this. So it definitely is much more satisfying, I think, at this point, going from 3 seconds to 1 second. So like almost a third of the time to be able to get this to line up in a much better way. It feels a little bit more snappy. There's way less frames in between to be able to see some of the mistakes even. And even some of the characteristics that I thought were mistakes before don't look too bad. Like my H gets a little bit too thin. I think my T, if I could say, kind of has a little some issues there, but it's definitely doing its kind of stretched type thing. I think I could make this even shorter if I wanted to. So if I zoom in a little bit closer, I can drag select these again, hold down the Option key or Alt key, and then click and drag to make this even shorter amount of time. So this is an effect that certainly looks good, I think, when you do it a little bit faster pace. But we do have quite a lot of letters to kind of mess around with. So I'm going to go back to my 1 second version of this. You may find that when you articulate your frames this way, that they don't always evenly line up on the frames. And I just want to show you that this is something that you may need to be conscious of. So I'm going to zoom in really, really close here. I'm going to actually offset this just a tiny bit and see if any of these frames, yeah, these frames are not lining up on the actual frames themselves. So this is an issue when you're holding down the Option key. I'm going to zoom in really close so you guys can see my keyframes, the actual individual keyframes here. And if you can tell here, when I've articulated these so that they're kind of, again, even spacing throughout each of them, that some of these keyframes are not even lining up as a change within individual frames. So if you can see that these keyframes are actually in the frame, I can't actually even select those keyframes, in which case I would need to just select them and kind of move them over. So it can be fixed. Here's another one over here. Can you see this one is like almost in the middle? This is like even more so in the middle. So it's okay. It's not an issue. It's not making it so it's like invisible or something. It's just going to be difficult to edit because if you move to this frame and you think when you're zoomed out that you're like, oh yeah, I'm lined up with that frame, but then you start editing things, it's going to actually make a new keyframe in there. So just be careful when you're articulating your frames. I think it lined up fine because we went from 3 seconds to 1 second. So it still lines up perfectly on the frames for each of these. And I can go through and double check them by just lining up my time crosshair and making sure that these are all blue when I overlap where my frames are. So just a thing that can happen when you articulate your frames kind of using the Option or Alt key. Now I'm going to go through the beginning now, since we went backwards in time, and sort of be able to add in a little bit more character within this to be able to get it to stretch a little bit more fine-tunedly the way that I wanted it to in the first place. So if I go in and sort of say, okay, you know, here it stretches really, really far, but the H is overlapping the end result. So it's actually, in my case, it's going past the initial point of where I wanted it to be. So it's actually stretching into the space of where the T needs to end up, which is causing this kind of conflict within my stretched type section. I mean, it looks kind of cool and it's got some character to it, but let's see if I can correct this a little bit better. So if I know that my H is going to end up here, I can adjust these each individually. And I want to give you kind of the tool set process that you can go through to be able to edit these things. So if you can see when I click on these, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer so you can see them. When I click on these, essentially you can tell which letter is which. It's annoying to me that I can't rename the name of this to be path. So I could say like S path or O path or N path or whatever. M path, that's kind of fun. But I don't think that this is something that'll let you do. But I can say that, oh, okay, this one here, here's the H. And I know that that's the H now because I've clicked on these paths to sort of say, okay, which one is which. And I can also see that these are the keyframes. So if I know that this is the one that I want to work in, this is one that I want to make corrections to first, I'm going to go ahead and just select this keyframe of the H. I'm going to make sure that only those keyframes are selected by drag selecting over top of them, which I think that is doing that. There we go. So those keyframes are selected. I'm going to hit Command-C copy, which will copy them. And then what I can actually do is go back to my beginning here and sort of go to my second keyframe and say, this is how I want this to change. I'm going to find the path that has the H on it, which is this one again. Select just that keyframe that I want to replace and hit Command-V paste and put it in, which that didn't work. What? Just did it. Let's try that again. Copy keyframe. All right, so let's copy this keyframe here. And then we'll go back to where I wanted it to be, which is the second one. Select this keyframe and paste. There we go. So I guess you just have to copy paste the keyframe, which is easy. Now I know that if this is the furthest distance on the left-hand side that I want my H to go, let me repeat that process because I'm sure I confused you. I'll go find the H. This one, I know this is where I want it to end up so that it doesn't go past that point. And actually I could include a guide for myself to sort of say, this is the edge of the H that I don't want it to go past. That would have been smart. So I'm going to select this, hit Command-C to copy, or Control-C if you're on a PC. I'm going to go back to my second frame, select that keyframe that I want to replace, which is this, just this one, and hit Command-V to paste. Now it's in the right spot. I know that's where I want it to be, but I do want it to stretch and sort of fill the space as it's coming, kind of filling that area. So I'm going to go ahead and select my tool here and sort of stretch this out to fill that space a little bit better. I want to get a little bit more variety within this kind of things here. So now I've sort of connected the H where I want it to go. Now, if this is the first keyframe, there's quite a big jump there, and maybe I need to actually give it a little bit more room to shine, just the H itself. So kind of give it a little bit more space. There we go. Not too bad. So that's one thing that I corrected. We'll need to sort of correct these as I go forward. Again, just like letter by letter. Here's the H series again. I've got that one still queued up to be pasted in. So I can hit Command-V to paste. And then if I want this to be the next move, I just need to sort of go from these, keyframe 2 to keyframe 3. And I'm just going to increase this stretching just a little bit. So it's got a little bit more character as it's sort of sliding into place. Whoops, just an anchor point there. And again, correct my keyframes as I go forward. Is this tedious? Yes. Is there a few free keyframes that I need to correct? Yes. Would this have saved me time if I had done this correctly the first time? Of course, but I didn't. And so now I need to go back and sort of make these corrections. So if this is how it's going to be stretched, I can see now that this I should be sort of like moved in a little bit further. And again, if you can tell, I'm just dealing with one half of this first. I'm really not even looking at the other side, which I'm sure also has other corrections that I need to include. And then just going back and forth. It's kind of like kerning in that I'm just going from one one keyframe to the next, just double checking that this motion is looking cool and kind of consistent. So snaps out and then slides in as these all kind of roll into place. I think I can get a little bit more characterization out of this space here. All right, and now I want to go in again, next frame on my H, paste it in so it's in the right spot. Oops, selected more than one. There we go. It should be pretty much set. I want to just then move in my keyframes for the I and the N a little bit closer to where they should go. They need to just include the white arrow tool as a tool in After Effects. That would make this so much more simple. All right, so that looks pretty good. The I is now snapping into place. The N is getting ready to snap into place. So continue moving forward with this. So my next keyframe is the second to last one. I again need to paste the H back into the place where it should go. And it's pretty much done. Move my I over, it should be pretty much done as well. So if I could find which one is the I, which is the one after the H, I could copy this keyframe and put it into place. The N should be pretty much done as well. I can copy this keyframe and put it into place. And this frame should be primarily the G, just stretching all crazy. I guess the G was a little bit off, so I'm going to redo that one as well. Just give it a little bit more character as it's coming in. That looks better. That's what I wanted it to do. It's hard to get that to go the first time. All right, now I can do the other side. Again, I want to start with the T because that needs to end up somewhere. And so I want that to kind of stretch the full distance of where it needs to go. So I'm going to find my T, which should be right above my H, copy the last keyframe and paste it over top of the first one, and then just stretch that super crazy so that it's coming in. Paste that again. The E take up a little bit of more space and then completely stretch the T to its extension. Sound effects are important to keep the workflow going. To get a little bit more motion out of my E between frame 2 and 3. Let's get that to come in a little bit faster there. Reset my T. Go. Get the M to slide in, space that out a little bit. I'm actually having fun, guys. This is fun for me. Hope you're enjoying it. Kind of cool effect. endpoint again. Even the distance between these two. Oops. Start too fast. My first frame should be empty. Not bad. Second pass was a lot better. Not perfect yet. Second pass was better. All right, I'm going to pause recording right there, guys.